Okay? You want me to say something first?
No, okay. Good morning, everyone. So before we begin this, I'd like to briefly introduce what we're doing today. So the Asia Institute and Korea Center for Digital Humanities at Sungmyung Women's University cooperate with EBS, one of the leading educational media in Korea, to give Korea Young the opportunity to discuss and debate with world-famous speakers. The Asia Institute is a think tank that handles problems which Asian countries are commonly facing. Moreover, Korea Center for Digital Humanities at Sungmyung Women's University is laboratory visioning international intellectual interchange. They are also aiming to collect, create, and share various kinds of knowledge in the virtual world, including MOOC, by using many different tools in the internet. This project, cooperating with EBS, will be utilizing Google Hangout, one of the notable video conference tools, to provide opportunity for students to discuss the issue regarding East Asia with great scholars. The opportunity will be open to anyone who is interested in expanding their knowledge. And today we'll begin our first hangout with Dr. Pastreich. So good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to interview Dr. Pastreich, the author of 속도가 아닌 방향이다 and 한국인만 모르는 다른 한국, and an active columnist at the 중앙일보 news agency. So we will discuss about the growing potential of Korea with our fellow students from the Sungmyung Women's University, Seogang University, and one of our bright high school students. Before we begin the session, could you please briefly introduce yourself, Dr. Pastreich?
Yes, so my name is Emanuel Pastreich. I teach at Kyunghee University, and I'm here at the Asia Institute. Of course, I write. I do a lot of research, originally in literature, but most recently we've been focusing here a lot on encouraging both understanding of Korea's culture and its potential, and also encouraging closer relations between the countries of East Asia.
Okay. Thank you so much. So before we begin, I'd like to have a chance of everyone introducing themselves. So myself is Jong-hee Kim, and I'm currently attending to Sungmyung Women's University, and I major in entrepreneurship. And I'm a moderator and also panel for this hangout. So next person.
Please.
I'll introduce myself, if that's okay. Hello, my name is Ma Ji-yeon, and I'm from Seogang University. My major is economics, and I'm a sophomore this year. I hope to gain some insight about Korea through this discussion, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next person.
I will introduce myself.
A little bit less than perfect. What happened?
Why don't high school student introduce herself?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Min-kyo Park, and I'm currently a senior at Seoul Global High School. Thank you for inviting me to this hangout here today.
Thank you.
Okay. Next person? Anyone? From Sungmyung Women's University? Yes.
I can't hear.
I think you should turn on the... Oh, yeah.
Your mic is off. Yes, good.
Hello, yeah. Hello, my name is Cheon Hee-sa, and I'm a sophomore in Sungmyung Women's University. My major is English Language and Literature. I'm so honored to participate in this special conversation, and I am really nervous and also excited today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Next, me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Yang So-hee, and I'm also a Sungmyung Women's University student. I'm junior, and my major is history and culture. So I'm so glad to be a member of this Hangout program today. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent.
Okay, so what's going on with the only man from panel?
Where's Senior?
Yeah, where is he?
He left. Senior 어디 갔어요? He's going to try and connect again.
Oh, okay. So then why don't we just move on, directly move on to our question and answer session. So if you have any questions for Dr. Pastreich, please feel free to ask him.
Please.
Can I ask you a question first, I guess? Okay, so my question is about 선비 정신. In your book, 한국인만 모르는 다른 대한민국, you mentioned the possibility of advocating 선비 정신 as one of the frontiers of Korean culture, while comparing this to Japanese ninjas and samurais. I agree that this is a great idea, but I had a few concerns. I think that people from different countries, especially young children and teenagers, accepted ninjas and samurais because they offered a more active, powerful, and healthy image, but overall, a cool image, like Ninja Turtles. Meanwhile, I think that zombie has a more quiet and passive atmosphere, and I think this quality might appeal less positively to people. So, my question is the zombie spirit meant to appeal to a different demographic, or do you think there are characteristics that will still appeal to young people? And if so, what are the reasons?
So it's an excellent question, and it's actually not an easy one to answer. To start with, the Sunbi tradition of an intellectual learning for the sake of interest in knowledge and a commitment, ethical commitment for a better society and to help those around one, does not have the immediate appeal of like samurais hacking up people with swords or sort of war and destruction, which has dominated our culture. So in a sense, if you wanted to make Sunbi culture something universal about thoughtfulness, commitment to peace, to the environment, and to education, understanding the world, you have to actually change our global culture itself, right? You're 100% accurate. It cannot compete in culture, popular cultures that exist today. However, that I don't believe it's true that culture cannot change. Culture can change, and it is totally possible that in the future we'll be able to create a more peaceful, more cooperative, and more intellectual culture. And actually, I would even say it's a very, very serious topic for us.
Thank you so much for your answer. So if you have any follow-up questions regarding the issue of zombie spirits, please feel free to ask. Anyone?
Please.
Okay.
I have a question. So would you say that as the previous speaker mentioned, that ninjas and samurais are more appealing to young people because they have a more overall cool image? Could it be possible that ninjas and samurais are more, I guess you could say, less in the way that it appeals to the younger generation? It's less of an intellectual kind of image and more of like a mainstream image?
Well, I don't want to dismiss things that are mainstream, but it certainly is less intellectual, and it's more active and more destructive. So I think when we ask our question about how do you introduce Sunbi culture, this idea of a intellectual engagement, commitment to people around one, and a positive effort to create harmony with the environment, this is not something you can market like ninja, or samurai. And I think almost that idea of branding or marketing is probably the wrong strategy. Rather, you have to think that the global culture that young people are surrounded by is itself profoundly flawed and corrupted. And we have to create a new culture, right, which is more peaceful, more sustainable, more concerned about other people. and get beyond this very self-centered consumer culture. So I think it's probably, my opinion is probably wrong to think, oh, we're just going to use, you'll have, you know, a sunbeam sailing out of the air like a superhero, right?
Yeah, I see.
Probably that it's not going to work that way. It's going to have to be rather that the very, very culture that we live in, that young people are exposed to, has to become more intellectual, more reflective, more mindful, and more about, you know, caring about other people, as opposed to if you watch like Batman, Superman movies, or sorts of things that kids are surrounded by, very, very unhealthy and self-centered culture.
I see. Thank you.
Well, by the way, there are 2 new people in this hangout. Let's give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Jinyoung, would you please introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, I had a small technical problem, so I'm now introducing myself. Hello, my name is Jinyoung Lee. It is a pleasure to participate as a panel in this seminar event. I studied illustration at the Rhode Island School of Design, and now doing culture research at the Asia Institute. Thank you.
Thank you. And Injun, could you please introduce yourself? Injun?
I can't hear.
Well, then let's just move on to our questions. Like, so if anyone has a question, please feel free to ask the professor.
I have a question that it's a little bit similar to this previous question, but you mentioned about the zombie spirit. However, there are already a lot of spirits which are similar to zombie spirit, like you told about ninja or samurai and chivalry. Can zombie spirit get a certain position among these spirits? Because to get a certain position, we should have a concrete mean or cultural chance. For example, Japan disseminate their ninja spirit through the animation named Naruto. Japan could do this because they have a strong animation industry. But do you think Korea have enough power like Japan to disseminate our culture?
Well, Japan overall, Korea's cultural power, you might say, is greater in many respects than Japan, but not in all sectors. So many things Southeast Asia, China, Central Asia, and even like Iran and South America are very interested in Japanese culture, in Korean culture. However, I think the challenge has been that Korean culture so far has been Japanese culture tends to be very exciting, but has really no content. It has no ethical content. It doesn't really offer you anything other than entertainment, with a few exceptions. So the hope would be that Korea can make use of its cultural power to have something a little bit more about some ethical sense to it. I mean, I think that's really the issue. And you can find that to some degree already in Korean culture. Koreans traditionally, I think more than many other cultures in Asia, have been very concerned with ethical issues and the ethical content of culture. Some people see that as a negative, right? That it's very didactic, right? Interested only in moral content. But in this age, I think it's actually a positive. And I think if we wanted to have a zombie culture that overall, you really have to think of it as being something really different, right? We're not trying to copy Japan or the United States. We're trying to create something like this, like what we're doing now, right? A serious, participatory discussion about issues. So could this, what we're doing now, become a new trend, like how you across Asia, or like have a serious, not just have kids hanging out listening to pop music, but actually talking seriously about the world, their thoughts. I think that's totally possible. Maybe that is the next part of the career.
Okay, thank you. That was great discussion about the issue of zombie spirits. So if anyone has question that is not related to zombie spirit, please start the discussion, please.
Please. Other questions?
Could I start the next question?
Please.
Oh. Okay. Have you ever heard about Hell Joseon?
Yes.
Yeah, it is a new compound word of Hell and Joseon dynasty, to be sarcastic nowadays due to unemployment problems and fierce competition in Korean society.
Right.
I would like to ask, what do you think about this phenomenon, and in this situation, what kind of mindset young Korean people should have?
Right. So, of course, saying Joseon in terms of Joseon dynasty is in a way a total misunderstanding, right? Because these particular problems are not at all related to Joseon. I mean, this highly competitive, hyperactive society, consumer society, the downgrading of the status of workers, etc. I think it really is a modern and recent phenomenon. So it's I would describe Hell Joseon, or that sort of Hell Korea, as primarily being a certain sense of helplessness in the system, right? That the whole of Korea, and I understand this. I mean, I certainly sympathize with the perspective. Korea has become this system that runs on its own, in which students are no longer. There was a recent a student, as you may know, from who quit Chungang University, and he wrote a famous manifesto, in which he said that the universities is no longer teaching, right? It's only 자격의 거래소, right? A place for selling qualifications. So university is no longer about learning or some greater purpose. It's just a way to get a graduation diploma so you can go to get a job. And then in some ways students spend more time getting ready for interviews than they do on their classes. So something is seriously wrong in the system, and I fully understand that. I think that there are two problems that come up in this Hell Joseon, however. The first is some Koreans think, oh, if I only went to another country, to New Zealand or Canada or somewhere like that, it'll be great. This is, I think, a profound misunderstanding of the cultural and economic contradictions and problems in those countries. You may not be aware of Hell New Zealand or Hell Canada, but if you go there, you may discover after a year or two that, in fact, you know, it has its own serious problems. These problems are universal. It's not uniquely Korean. And the second part is that to solve these problems in a way, the first step is not to pray for some messiah or leader, miracle worker, but it actually starts with us, right? So if education is a problem, there are little steps we can take on a daily basis proactively to start to transform the environment we're in. I'll give you an example. At my school, by the way, Hell Joseon is terrible for students, but it's also a problem for teachers, right? Teachers are now evaluated in very strict ways. You know, only certain activities count. Other things, the university doesn't care, and they, in fact, stripping down the benefits for teachers. So teachers are also under pressure. But for example, many people, teachers, administrators, they just say, oh, this is just the way it is. It's just our fate. So they don't even try. They don't even like say, maybe we could do it a different way. They don't make a proposal. They don't try and imagine. You need me? I'm doing something wrong. I'm sorry. They don't even imagine that there could be some other way to do things. So I think it's a very, very serious problem. Sometimes people think there's a better country out there, which I think is unlikely. But more importantly, we have to sort of start with this, right? Have a discussion and say, how could we make things better? And that's really the beginning of real change, is here.
Well, I have one follow-up question regarding the issue of Hell Joseon. Well, yesterday I have attended a conference. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so there one speaker said that we should avoid using words like negative words such as Hell Joseon, because this will make Korean feel the situation more negative than now.
Right.
However, I think that we should not avoid using this word, because this kind of negative word can help people to recognize and face the problem that we are facing currently,
Right.
and it will help them to more actively solve the problems that we are facing now. So, what do you think about this?
I think it's a very, very important and difficult topic. On the one hand, to be overly negative, to discourage people, to make them think that there's really nothing you can do about it, the system is fixed, there's no way you can change anything, this doesn't really help people at all. So you always need to have a sense of hope and the possibility that even with little steps, we can really start to make this world better through our own efforts and through cooperation with each other. On the other hand, I think if you go around and you say, oh, we can only say happy things, right? And the really serious problems in the world, we'll leave it up to the experts to solve it, or we'll deal with it tomorrow. We're not really going to address those. That's a very, very dangerous approach, because it leaves the possibility that you'll just take whole sections of the problems that we have to deal with and just say, oh, that's just not something we just don't talk about. I see this in Korea, but I actually see it more in America than I do in Korea, and it's very worrisome, that idea that we can't talk about things which are, not good. So it's a delicate balance. On the one hand, you have to be honest enough to say, this is what's wrong, in an objective, almost scientific way. On the other hand, I think it's your responsibility to present your ideas in a constructive way and to give the people around us hope, right? To say there is a possibility that things can be better if we head in this direction, and that's really what we need most desperately.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have a question?
I have a question.
No
So,
one?
since we are talking about Hell Joseon, I want to ask you another question.
Right.
Since you also majored in Chinese and Japanese culture,
Right.
I want to know if such pessimism like Hell Joseon is common in other Asian countries as well, or is it special to Korea?
Right. Well, I think there are certain aspects of the issues, right? I mean, employment has become much more difficult to get, and it's much less stable. If you get a job, it's less certain. There's less of a commitment to young people. I mean, this is a very, very serious problem in Asia and in the United States and other countries too. You have an older generation of people who are not really all that concerned about what the issues are that are faced by young people. And we have in Korea, it's related to the problem of aging society, and you have right now, say in the National Assembly, sort of older people's groups who want to take all the money and use it for like old people's, facilities, and they don't really want to give money for like elementary schools or middle schools because it just doesn't interest them. So some things are general, but the specific issue, for example, this high rate of suicide and depression that we find in Korea is higher than what we find in Japan or China, or for that matter, higher than North Korea or the United States. So there is something distinctive for the psychological response that Koreans have. And that is a little bit paradoxical. That's to say, on the one hand, there's a higher suicide rate, higher rate of depression and things. People feel greater pressure. When they do surveys, Korean kids tend to say they're unhappy, right, or they're discontented at a higher level in other countries. On the other hand, if you compare like young kids in like Korea with those in Japan and China, the ones in Korea, they tend to have like more energy, and they seem like immediate impression is they seem to be more energetic, more willing to do things. So it's actually it's a profound paradox in Korean culture, right? On the one hand, a very sort of depressive, discouraged aspect. On the other hand, a very sort of ebullient cultural power, right? All you see like the K-pop groups and the enthusiasm of young people in many cases. So it's not an easy to explain this aspect of Korean culture.
I also have a follow-up regarding the issue of Halljoseon.
Please.
So the problem of unemployment and the titles from colleges and the issue of Halljoseon, what do you think? Do you think this kind of problem is subject to change or anytime soon? Or is there anything that can help this change or move on?
Right. Well, I tend to go with Peter Drucker's he's a famous management guru who said, the best way to predict the future is to make it, right? So I don't know what the future is. I'm not a fortune teller, and I actually, in some ways, I really disagree with this tendency of people like in media or academics to say, oh, I'm going to predict what the future is going to be. It's going to be really gloomy, go home and cry, because that sort of assumes that young people or people in general have no agency, no ability should say, right? Your ability to influence things. So I think it would be naive to think we can change the 5, 7 of us or the people out there listening that we can just tomorrow change things. On the other hand, I think if, for example, we as a group here come to an agreement now or in the future that we're all going to work together, we're going to talk to our friends, we're going to start creatively through art, through our writing, through meeting people to say, this is what Korea could be. Korea has some great aspects to education, to culture, but they have been downplayed or not properly highlighted, and we have an idea, a plan for what Korea could be, and we're going to go forward and give it to as many people as possible and make sure that this really is taken seriously. That I think 5, 10, 100, 1,000 people are totally capable of profoundly shifting the culture of Korea. And I think in some ways it's easier now because the opposition, as it were, is so completely lacking in any concept of what Korea should be, and tends to repeat old stories from the past. Mm-hmm. So I think the opportunity to really create a better Korea is definitely there, but it requires, above all, it requires self-starting on the part of young people, a certain degree of bravery, right, to talk about things that other people may not want to hear initially, and a commitment to each other. That's maybe the most serious problem in Korea, is that young people, because of the education system, tend to be trained from a young age to compete against the other students in their class. Or there's always a competitive aspect. Mm-hmm. And so that keeps young people from taking the other position, the other strategy, which is to say, let's all get together and work to help each other and to create a better society.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jin-young, do you have any question? If you have, please take turn and then ask.
Yes. Do you have any future technology in mind that could possibly benefit the world community to overcome this kind of socio-economical struggle?
Right. So I've written about this, and we've talked about this previously. I think the technology necessary for working together, for us to work together, what we're doing right now, or globally, we don't really need more technologies per se. Should I click on? We have more than enough. In a way, the issue is how do we put them together in terms of with some sort of a cultural, content and some vision of what we're trying to do, and that's, I think, the key, right? So what we're doing now, this technology has been around for whatever 15, 20 years. We could have been doing it a long time ago, but most people don't, right? They tend to use social media to show pictures of fat cats or cafe lattes that they drank or cake they ate at the coffee shop, but they don't really use it to communicate in terms of putting forth some new concept for how the world could be or to address things like Hal Chosun. So the first step, I think, is when people like yourselves think, oh yes, I could start to use this, to actually create something, create a better society. But I have a little hesitation, Jin Young, in this respect, because I think I have a certain authority because I'm a professor and people know who I am to some degree. So if I start to tell you this is what you should do, that in fact is not necessarily a positive, right? You may end up thinking, oh, we have to listen to what he says before we can do it. So my role should be as a sort of, as we say, catalyst, right? Say, we could do something, get the idea in your mind, but it really ought to be you, right, who starts to say, this is what we can do. Well, what are your thoughts?
I agree to what you just said. What it got to me is that I have another sort of question to ask. Then how can we sort of tell the younger generation to think that not only sort of the technology is something that you can create, it's not only the visual culture that the only thing that you can sort of create, you could also pioneer and create culture as well, and it's not simply just art and simply just science. It could just be lifestyle, and it could also be sort of literature, and that sort of kind of thing can have this creative mind into culture is very important.
Professor, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
So I was just give you an example, right? So for example, you could say, me and my friends, we're going to take our room, we're going to cut out some paper and make it into like a jungle or some interesting space, cultural space, right? And we'll send a message out to everybody and say, come at 4 o'clock this afternoon, there's going to be this great event. And then use that as a way for cultural exchange, but also to create and imagine something better. If people did that regularly, you start to create a real sort of excitement among young people that they can create their own space. One last point would be that we tend to be very, someone in design, many of us are very accustomed to sort of perfectly finished commercial design. And we tend somehow to be drawn to that as opposed to something which someone did by hand. And so that's a bias. But we can get over that bias and get to a point where we appreciate just what people put together, like, creativity by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I see there are some questions here. Go ahead.
Oh, so, well, I have totally new question.
Okay.
In your recent article, you have mentioned that South Korea is strong in quickly accepting new ideas and implementing them.
Right.
However, I believe that South Korea has many conservative laws, and thus South Korea is very careful for accepting new ideas.
Right.
So accordingly, could you give us more explanations regarding the issue of how South Korea can become stronger country in the future, even with its repressive law, especially to entrepreneurs?
Oh, well, like, Korea is not a perfect environment, I wouldn't say, and there have been, of course, there are laws, but I think in Korean society it's probably less law, but rather convention, right? I mean, you could, for example, bankers could give more funding to small entrepreneurs or young people starting their own businesses. They don't. I mean, they just dismiss in general. So it's more, I think, cultural than it is law. I'm trying to remember the question originally. You were asking about the...
Even with its repressive law, how can South Korea become more stronger in the future?
Oh, right. So I think, any society, I mean, Korea, as you know, was not a very open society in many respects in the 1970s, right, in the 80s, and it was transformed through young people. Now, some people think it was just, demonstrations at universities, but that's probably only part of it, right? I mean, part of it had to do with just every day, constantly people saying, couldn't we make it a better world? This is, I mean, I don't want to tell you how to do it. I can only tell you that it can be done, right? It can be done. And it requires you to engage a very wide range of people. I think it requires you to do something in a very constructive way. But it really is about culture, right? Creating a new culture which is emphasizing ordinary people, I would say, and their potential. Now, I want to say, in that respect, that we have to also be self-aware. And this is, I think, a very important point. Often you have people, and they'll say, in Korea or the United States, they'll say, oh, things are dominated by the, rich 1%, and we're victims, right? But in fact, often the problem is very much with us as well, right? Because, we may think there are rich people who are, not helping us, but we ourselves are benefiting from people who make even less than us or who are treated worse. We don't necessarily say hello or thank you to the people who clean, our houses or our offices. We don't say, thank you to the people who make the food for us in the restaurants. We don't show proper appreciation in many respects for those around us. So if you want to change how other people behave, the best way to do it is to change the way you behave. And so making a new culture, I think, is not about voting for or supporting some person out there. It really is about changing your own habits.
Well, then I think that there are like two main problems in South Korea, which is first economical disparity, and
Right.
second political discommunication with the government and the citizens.
Right.
Then among these two problems, which do you think should be prioritized and be solved most
Well, I would start.
urgently?
Let's
Yeah.
talk about the communication between government and citizens.
Yeah.
This is a serious issue. It's not a Korean problem. I mean, we're finding this around the world, and it's getting more and more serious. However, I think it's a misunderstanding to just think of it in terms of this government out there and us, right? Because just go to your apartment building where you live and say, do you know the names of the people on your building? How often do you meet with them and talk to them about how to make our building better? How do we solve problems? How can we help each other out? With various different issues. In many cases in Korea or other places, you don't know anybody, right? You're all living alone. You share this building, but there's no community. And it's worse. I mean, in Korea in the 1960s or 70s, people did know, and they did help each other, in many respects. So if at the local level there's no communication, there's no cooperation, there's no exchange, then forget about the highest level of government, right? And so in the same way you say, well, I wish the government was more concerned or rich people would give us more opportunities for entrepreneurship. But are you concerned about the guy who, the PayPal person who brings you your lunch, how well he's taken care of? Because if you're not concerned about that, then you're not really any different than that, imagined government. So it would be the government has to change and its policy has to change. But if everybody else starts to change their habits, government will naturally change, right? So it really is about culture, in my opinion.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a very, very important question.
So, does anyone has questions?
Or comments, please.
I have a question that also deviates from the topic that we were just talking about. In one of your previous articles, you started off the article on the attack on Pearl Harbor, and you went on to mention RIMPAC, the maritime warfare exercise, and its effectiveness in American militia. Right. And you also further elaborated on the importance of possibly conducting such a union in the Asian Pacific regions, a new form of RIMPAC to be managed by South Korea, a sort of joint military exercise. Right. But I noted that in your article, you wanted this joint union to be more as a unitary opportunity to resolve environmental issues and help with the aftermath of climate change, as opposed to a means following military exercise, right, which is by all means a possible opportunity to further advancement in peacemaking. But regardless of the possible benefits that may arise, which to most countries should sound appealing, what do you believe are the complications that prevent the countries of the Pacific region from taking such measures? And do the possible obstacles that may arise from this union outweigh the possible benefits?
Well, I want to say, just to make a remark, to say we're now engaged in our small group in a more serious discussion about critical issues than you'll get anywhere in the media. So congratulations. I think we're already starting to change the culture. On the issue of the proposal for RIMPAC, which is this effort to bring together different navies now in Hawaii yearly, and there was a sort of breakthrough last time in which they invited the People's Liberation Army Navy to participate. So China was a sort of a member of it. So we have a very, very serious problem here throughout the world, and particularly in East Asia, which is this large military buildup, large militaries, which by their very nature tend to seek out some sort of confrontation and cause enormous problems. So how do we solve this problem? Well, you can protest against it, but I mean you'll find paradoxically that although you may be worried about the militarization of East Asia, when you actually talk to military people, individuals, they're actually all pretty decent people, right? They're not, you can't find any bad people in there. So it tends to be more a systemic problem. So the question, I mean, to me is, if you want to solve this, and I think it's an extremely serious issue, that's to say, if you start to get, more tension between the United States or between Japan or the United States and China, if China starts to feel more threatened by recent developments, that it can lead to an escalation which will eventually lead to some sort of serious conflicts. And as I had a discussion yesterday about Jefferson, who's originally a military active figure in the U.S. military, and he said that whenever they do these war games for conflict between the United States and China, military conflict, that in every single scenario it ends in a nuclear war, right? There's no way to start a small fight with China and the United States in which you just say, oh, let's call it off, right? It tends to escalate up because of the structure. So it has to be taken very seriously. So the point of the proposal was to say, what are the real security threats in East Asia? This is a very serious question, right? So I would say we could probably agree, or many people would agree, like cybersecurity, very serious issue, organized crime, and climate change, right? This tremendous destruction of the environment that we're seeing taking place. So you could say, well, the military will disappear, and we'll use that money to solve these problems. Well, it's a great idea, but it's not going to happen institutionally. So maybe the answer is rather to slowly, culturally, transform what we mean by military and what we mean by security to be more inclusive and deal with the issues of what really security is about today. But I don't think it's an easy task by any means. It's going to be very difficult. I think it's much better to engage in trying to do something in terms of dialogue and discussion.
Right.
To just say, oh, it's not my problem, right? Or I'm worried and I can do nothing. Or for that matter to say, I just don't like military, I don't like police, I wish they would just all go away, I'm not interested in talking with them, I'm not interested in a real dialogue.
So in the case of making a possible formal union, as you mentioned, the feelings, it has to be a consensus between the other countries, right? So do you think that these feelings of considering a union to engage in mutual activity will be reciprocated? Right.
Well, of course, I tend to see the response to climate change as being the primary issue here. But there is a structural imbalance, or sort of, well, particularly in Northeast Asia, right, in which you have the United States, which has been very engaged in Northeast Asia. It has a bilateral alliance relationships with South Korea and with Japan, but Japan and South Korea themselves are in some ways rivals and very aware of each other. Politically, but also strategically or militarily. And then you have China, which the United States has treated as sort of like a market, a place to buy things and sell things, but not to be taken seriously and in a way seen as a potential rival or enemy. So this is, I would say, is a very terrible structure. And if you compare it with other, let's say, with the achievement of Europe, I think my personal opinion is that China just has to be engaged and included in any long-term security structure, and that really is the answer. And the resistance to that has come largely from the United States, but to a certain degree from Japan as well, because for a lot of reasons, a lot of structural reasons. But so we can't change that today in our conversation, but we can start to talk about it seriously and say, we're not angry at any particular person. We don't have an agenda per se, but we think this is something which is really serious. You know, we don't want to risk wars or military confrontations, and we don't really have the time or the money because we have to respond to this terrible threat of climate change, which is going to take, you know, an enormous effort in itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the very important point.
To continue the discussion?
Could we also talk about some of the questions that that is written on the Q&A?
Should I read one of them? Okay, so which one? So good day, Pastreich. Korea must have a central role in the peace and coexistence in international society because, oh, I cannot see it. I cannot read it. It is this? It is crucial for Korea to have equal relations between the two nations to become productive. I'm not sure what the countries are here. I'm sorry, I have a little trouble. Which two countries? China and Korea. China and the United States, right. So, of course, Korea finds itself in a difficult position often, and increasingly now. I think most Americans are very happy to live with, you know, China and Korea peacefully together, but there is a small group of people within the United States who, for their own, I think, mistaken ideas of what America's strategic interests are, have been going out of their way to create a confrontation with China and with North Korea. It's extremely worrisome, and I feel compelled to talk about it because I think the risks are just so high. The risks for you, for us, are so high. So what should Korea do? Well, I think Korea can play a very important role in addressing these issues because it has an ability to engage both the United States and China at a very high level and in different ways. However, I don't think it's going to be easy by any means. I think probably the most important first step is consensus among Koreans themselves about what Korea's position is. And the first step for that, I think, comes back to confidence in one's own culture and one's own perspective, right? In a way, the only way you can resolve some of these more serious conflicts, little things, of course, always exist, but more serious between the United States and China is to say, why don't we do this, right? Make a proposal to China or to the United States to say, maybe we could do it this way. And this is, I think, the biggest problem we have in Korea, and I've seen this all the time with very educated, Korean businessmen or diplomats who go to Washington, D.C. or Beijing. They're better educated than I am, but somehow they don't really feel the confidence to say to the American or to the Chinese or the Japanese or whoever to say, this is an idea, why don't we do this? They feel rather these are these big countries and somehow Korea is just this little peninsula between them. They don't confidently feel they can do something. But in fact, when they do, I think, when Koreans do, we often find that they have certainly capacity to start to change this.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yes.
Can I ask a question? Okay.
I'm listening.
Okay. I read that your column that is related to low birth rate in South Korea.
Right.
And recently, due to the radical social change, many people prefer being single even after the marriageable age,
right.
Or even married couple prefer not having baby.
Right.
And I think that there are numerical reasons that affect the people to prefer being single, and one of the reasons is that unlike the past, many people are becoming more individualistic, and
Right.
they avoid getting bothered by someone else. So, however, in your article about low birth rate problem in South Korea, you have argued that one of the biggest reasons why people prefer not having babies is because Korea is unsettled welfare policies for women with babies. Well, however, as I mentioned above, I believe that Korea's low birth rate is not the problem of South Korea itself, but rather it's some kind of worldwide paradigm and all-linked issue. So, what do you think about this?
Right. Well, of course, I think we're probably both correct at different levels. In a general sense, we've moved our culture. I think it's been much more corrupted and become much more self-centered consumption culture. Right. I do this, I get some pleasure, and so we've moved further and further away from a culture based upon concern for others around us, for our families, etc. And often we tend to see that sort of affection or concern for others as somehow being reflective of a old, boring, traditional culture, right? So it's more exciting and more interesting to be selfish, to be expressive, to realize yourself. And you get this, of course, in media broadcasts and advertising, etc. So that is the most fundamental issue. However, I think the lack of support for women having children is also an issue, right? That you may not be thinking about having 2 kids or 3 kids, but if there was a system in place in which if you had children, you got a 1-year paid leave, and you got, education was free through college, and you had other support so you could bring your child to your workplace, and you leave them on the first floor in the play group, and you could watch, on the Skype camera 24 hours a day how your kid was doing, then your resistance, right, to having children or getting married would be reduced because having children would not seem like an incredible burden or risk. So it is significant that it's so hard to have children in Korea, that it's so expensive, that people think, they used to have 5 or 6 children. Now they have maybe one, and that does have something to do with the way in which the priority is shifted.
Oh, okay.
But they're both true. I mean, I think if you want to change the world, you do have to think sometimes about policy, right? What policies are in place. But you also have to be aware that policy is not the most critical thing. It's the culture. It's the way, the actions, the assumptions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So does anyone have a question?
My personal opinion, one of the characteristics of Korean is that we always instigate ranking in everything, including our job, major, education, or etc. I think that the main reason of this phenomenon is Korea's education system, and it's difficult to create a point of contact between culture and administration that you emphasize in your book. So we need to change our education system. This is a fundamental problem. And how do you think about this problem? And do you have any own solution for this problem?
Right. The education problem in Korea is an extremely serious problem. I think there are education problems. So Koreans should not. I think Koreans should not assume that it's just a Korea problem. But in the Korean case, increasingly education has become a business. So students are treated like customers, right? And companies, either hagwon, education institutions, or the makers of textbooks, look at it as a way to make money. So this is a fundamentally wrong perspective, right? The point of education is not to make money off education, but rather to provide Korea in the future with motivated, educated people. It's an investment in the future of Korea as a whole. So one step is to change that culture, right? The assumptions about what education means. It's not about making money. You should not be making money off of education. It's an investment in the future. But that has to do with the culture in general, to say, if people don't think together as a group, they're only in it for themselves, then they're incapable of thinking in that way about what the potential is. I would say, however, that although the classroom or the system of things seems impossible to change, that this is not, in fact, true. In a way, if every student who went to school every day when they saw their teacher said, why don't we do this, right? And they did it 10 times, 100 times, I guarantee you that the Korean education system would start to change. But I think that one of the problems is that students are, of course, victims, but they also have become extremely passive in their attitude. They don't really think. They don't go forward and make proposals. They don't actively try and come up with an alternative that they promote to their teachers, to their local, politicians, to the government. And so there is a creative way. I mean, for example, if you're a local assemblyman, right? You're 위시로한. If every day at his office he had 100 students coming and they're saying, this is our idea, this is how we can make education better, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. Or if the principals of all the schools were constantly have students came up with them with proposals, things would start to change. I guarantee you. I mean, it might take 6 months or a year, but things would start to change. The problem is that nobody does that. I mean, literally nobody is showing up at the principal's office and saying, me and my friends, we got together, we really think education is great, we respect our teachers, but here's our idea about how we could do it. And then come back tomorrow and say, oh, did you read our proposal? What can we do? If you can't do it, who should we talk to? So I think students are maybe a little bit underestimating their capacity to engage in the system itself and play a role. And finally, the system is not inherently made to stop you or to be exclusive. There are systems set up for you to meet with local politicians, with people in education, etc. You may not think it's very effective, but if you haven't tried it, right, and you haven't tried it 10, 100, 1,000 times, then you don't really know whether it works or not.
So you mean participation is the most important factor of change?
I think there's not one factor, which is I'm giving you my own opinion, so it might be wrong, but I think it has to be at all levels. So the first is yourself, right? Start to, when you go to school, thank the people who make food for you in the cafeteria. Thank the people who clean the place for you. Show respect for everybody. Make sure nobody's excluded. Don't think, be proud that you're the best in your class. Be aware of those who are not doing so well in school and maybe even try and help them. That's the most basic shift, right? But from that comes the idea of making little proposals. Let's do a little bit of thing in our class, in our school, make a little time, get together with students over lunch and discuss something of content. That sort of shift. And then the next is to say, go to the principal or go to your local politician or go and say, go once, go twice, go 100 times until they start to think maybe this is something they should be thinking about. But that's, in a way, is the last step. If you started to get young people, I'm really honored to be with this very important group of students here, but if young people started to teach themselves, right, if they had their free time and lunch and they sat down with themselves and discussed what should we do about education policy, how can we make things better for ourselves, how do we deal with an aging society, and they started to think to themselves, discuss it, write notes to each other, make little proposals like that, then I think you start to see a different Korea. Because you're not really seeing that. Are you seeing that? Go ahead.
My computer is.
Your computer is.
Okay. I'm
listening.
Yes, can. Now it's working.
Okay. Anyone have a question or comment you wanted to make on any of these topics?
I have a follow-up question.
Sure. Excellent.
Well, actually being the only high school student here, I'm currently still under the pressure of being in a society and under the education system where I'm graded on a bell curve, and my grade depends on the grades of other students. And because I've actually experienced both the education system of westernized countries as well as Korea, so for me, it was a big change coming from somewhere where my grades and my scores were constantly in competition against myself. And coming from that to a country where it's not about being in a competition with myself and achieving something greater than what I had achieved before, it was more about being in a competition with other people. So I think that kind of education system itself kind of influenced my mindset and the way that I approached things and my attitude in the educational environment. And as you said, a lot of Korean students are passive. And I think one of the reasons is because Korea's education system is built on so many complicated levels that the Board of Education and the whole system itself is almost political. It's really difficult for students to be involved. And I actually do have a couple friends who have gone to the Board of Education and had some questions, but in my experience, it was really difficult for the students ourselves to actually make a change because there are so few students willing to take that step and get directly involved. And how do you think about this?
Well, that's exactly right. That is the issue. And I think, well, let's take it in the other extreme. I mean, let's suppose you went to school and none of the teachers were teaching anything. It was all canceled, right? If the students had the will, if they had a vision for what a better Korea could be, how they're going to work to make a better Korea, they can teach themselves, right? You don't need teachers. I mean,
Right.
if you really care about something, they can do it themselves if they're motivated. So I personally think if students are motivated, they have a vision. It's two things, right? On the one thing, you have to be aware that things are profoundly wrong. This is not acceptable, right? There has to be that sense of crisis. On the other hand, it has to be combined with some sort of internal optimism that you can actually do something, right? If you don't have the two, you cannot really succeed, right? If you just have optimism and you ignore and don't pay attention to real issues, then you're naive, right? If you just think about the problems and you have no optimism, then you're going to be depressed and suicidal. So it's a combination of the two, which is the essence. And if there are a few students who are doing that, then there is hope. But I would say, in a way, the first step is not, for you to go see your principal or your local politician. The first step is to get what we have now, a bunch of students talking to each other and saying, what could we do? What would be a better world? What would be the first small steps we can do? And I think this is a good example of it, right? If students start to teach themselves, right, they say, education and learning, understanding the world is really important for me, and it's important in an ethical sense, right? I don't do education because I want to get a job. It's because education and learning is how we make a better world. It's how we're responding ethically. That if you make that transformation and start to learn for yourself, even if you're really busy studying for school, there's still a little bit of time for this. And that if you get more students doing that, then they themselves, they'll change the way their parents think. Because politicians or the head of Ministry of Education, whoever, they have kids too, right? I mean, they're influenced by their own kids. So you can start to change the culture, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
Well, okay.
I have another question, but it's something we haven't talked about. Well, I spent a year in high school in the United States.
Where were you?
In the United States. I spent a year there.
Where?
High school years.
Where?
Can you hear me?
Where?
In the United States. In the
I know. Which state was it? Where were you? I was curious.
Oh, Washington State.
Washington D.C. or Washington State?
Washington State.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions.
Please.
When I spent my year there, I found many students who learned about Korea because of K-pop and K-dramas. And I know that you're not interested in those concepts, and I don't think it's the only thing about Korean culture that can gain the interest of foreigners, but I want to ask you why you don't think you're not really interested in K-pop and K-dramas, and the concepts you talked about, like the Sunbi spirit and Hongi Ingan, can they be part of improving the image of Korea with K-pop and K-dramas, or do you think they should not go along with each other? This is something I've been curious about.
Right. So I'm not, thank you for a very important question and one I want to clarify. So I'm not anti-K-pop or anti-anything particularly. It has its value, and it's been very successful and very helpful to Korea. However, my personal feeling about this, me and maybe some other people as well, is that the issues that we're dealing in our society today of the gap in wealth between the extremely rich and increasingly poor working people, the destruction of the environment, the use of coal and the microparticles and misemonji in the air, the overall move towards military confrontations around the world. These are really serious issues. So in a way, I just think it's a different environment. You cannot no longer, the fun is over now. It's nice to have a good time, but if you just are sort of interested in like pop culture, which is about me, and my own good time and eating food or dancing or hanging out with my boyfriend, girlfriend, that it's just not appropriate to this particular moment in history. That's one point. And the second is that Korea, I think, loses its potential if it's so focused on this consumer, K-pop culture, because a lot of people in the world just don't know that there's more to Korea than that. However, I argued this 5 years ago, 4 years ago. It's gotten better. I mean, there's more Korean dramas out there about traditional Korea. There's more efforts introduced, Korean culture, Hanbok, Hanok. I think there's been an overall improvement. But if you go to the United States, most people, they know traditional Japanese culture. They have a sense about samurai or other things. But Korea is just a blank slate. So I guess I would want to finally say it's not K-pop is great. Go with K-pop, do it. But we can add a little bit of more content, which has maybe a little bit more ethical content to it. And it's really important because I think some Koreans just may not be aware of this fact. But lots of people in Southeast Asia, in Mongolia, Uzbekistan, China, Brazil, Iran, they watch Korean dramas, right? What do they see when they see Korean dramas? They see rich people driving big cars, in big houses, wasting a lot of food, living a good life without a real concern about any ethical or environmental issues. So what do? They say, I want to live like those rich people who are, I think all Koreans live in big houses and drive big cars with chauffeurs. And so I'm going to go out and I'm going to cut down all the trees on the mountains near me. I'm going to farm more than I would and use up my water and soil. I'm going to use, pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers to try and get a little bit more out of my ground. And I'm going to try and live like these imagined Koreans. So what are the consequences of that for our environment, for East Asia? I think they're very serious. So I don't take it lightly in a way. Gangnam, I mean, Psy is a nice guy and all, but a consumption-driven culture, the future is not bright.
Well, we also have a question from the public.
Please. You want me to?
You can read it.
I can't see. Can you read it? Okay. There are lots of them. You want me to pick one or?
Yeah. You can pick one and answer.
Terrorism. Which one? I've become a politician. We're talking about culture. Which one should we do? Terrorism law. So there's a whole discussion about terrorism law, the filibuster. Should we talk about that? So I don't know the case well enough to respond, although to say that this is something which is going on globally in every country, and there's an effort to push through sort of more harsh laws that empower various different organizations to do whatever they want. I think it's a really serious issue, and I think it cannot be resolved without significant participation from citizens. So I think I don't want to give an opinion on the particular law because I just don't know it, but I think if you're concerned about this, that you should be involved. Don't expect someone else to do it for you, right? I think that's the only thing I'd say about that. Then, okay, Korea between China and Japan. Well, we already talked about this a little bit.
Yes.
So then the command, what's the military command, disappeared. 밑에 있는 신문지 어디 갔어? 사라졌어. Okay. 잠깐만. This one. Okay. The military command. So for the military in Korea, presently the final highest level decision is made by a American general, I believe, and so has a right of command which should belong to Korean president. Korea has a level of dependence on China and the market. The Korean government cannot make a policy alone. This issue has been going on for a long time. The discussion about Korea's relationship with the United States, the function of the alliance, and the dependency that Korea has tended to show towards the United States and towards China. I think I don't address this directly in anything I write, But I think my book and the idea of cultural awareness and self-awareness is part of a sense of Korea making its own decisions and maybe putting forth its own ideas. So I don't have a particular comment on the military command, chain of command system, although I have written that I think the U.S.-Korea alliance has to change profoundly in terms of its nature and its mission, because the nature of security has changed so largely. I think the first step for Koreans to do is, even if it's unwelcome, even if it causes problems, to go forward to the United States and to China and make proposals at every level to say, this is how we could do things, so that it's not Korea passively receiving things, but rather Korea articulating a Korean perspective, which is not just about Korea, but it takes into consideration the interests and needs of all partners. But I have seen repeatedly at think tanks in Korea, events that I go to, Koreans will just read off these things from American think tanks, and they'll just without any critical discussion about them, or not even an effort to see whether there may be other opinions in America other than like the big three think tanks, just repeat it and say as if it was something which came down from God. And so I think that that's a serious mistake on the part of Korea. Not to say that I'm advocating any particular policy, but that you guys are smart. I can tell it just from this conversation. You're thinking about things. Korea is totally capable. Koreans are totally capable of articulated vision. And I think the question of China, United States, Japan relations, which are complicated, and North Korea and the move towards North-South unification, etc., in a peaceful, stable environment in here, you cannot wait for somebody else to come along and say, oh, we decided it and we're going to give you the answer. You have to be engaged in thinking about it, in making proposals, in creating a vision of what might be possible.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. So before we end this hangout, Dr. Pastreich, do you have any comments to leave for
Well,
the...
I'm sorry I couldn't talk directly to everybody out there. I'm really glad you took the time to be here. I'd like to end just by suggesting that I don't really know what I'm talking about. I have some general ideas about what I think is helpful, but if you want to talk about what's important to young people, you guys know what's important to young people. So my hope would be that you will pick up on some things that I mentioned, talk amongst yourselves, and come up with a small idea of what you could do on a small scale. And if many different people start small, it can start to slowly change our culture. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone wants to leave a comment about this first hangout with Great Scholar?
Not Great Scholar. Your friend, Emanuel, right? Come to agency. We're going to have a event on March, what is it? March, 언제죠? 14일?
23.
아니, 평화, 23rd? 평화, we have a Korea peace movement to talk about peace in Korea and in East Asia. 여기 있죠. 잠깐만. I'll give it to you. It's on March 12th, Saturday, March 12th, from 6 to 8 p.m. So if you have a chance, please come.
Thank
you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.